The space station Vraction Prime floated like a silver giant above the Orion Belt. Its polished walls reflected the light of distant stars. Ships of all shapes and colors arrived from across the galaxy. Ambassadors, traders, and warriors from hundreds of worlds gathered here. It was the heart of the Galactic Assembly, where great powers met to shape the future. Among these travelers stood Captain James Carter, a man from the Deathworld Mar-9. He was tall, strong, and silent. His face showed no fear, though he knew many around him already doubted his place here. His people were new to the assembly, and most species whispered behind his back. They called Mar-9 a savage world. They called his people animals dressed as diplomats. Carter ignored them. He had come not to seek their approval, but to claim his people's right to stand as equals. His black survival uniform, marked with the silver crest of Mar-9, was simple compared to the shining robes and armor of other ambassadors. He carried no weapons. He carried only the weight of his people's honor. The assembly hall was vast. Rows of seats curved around a wide center platform. Above them, screens showed the faces of every ambassador present. High Chancellor Serene, a tall, pale being with glowing eyes, stood in the center. She raised her long hand for silence. "Let the assembly begin," she announced. The speeches began. Leaders from many worlds spoke of peace, trade, and unity. Carter waited patiently. He knew his turn would come. But before it did, a voice broke the air like a knife. "How long must we tolerate these Deathworlders among us?" The voice sneered. All eyes turned to Chancellor Vorthak of the Cellari Dominion. He was tall and lean, with sharp features and dark skin that shimmered like polished stone. His long fingers curled as he spoke again. "Look at them," Vorthak said, pointing to Carter. "They speak of honor and tradition. But what is their tradition? A childish game of blood and violence. The so-called right of challenge. Barbaric. Meaningless. A fool's show." Laughter rose from some in the hall. Others remained silent. Carter stood slowly. His voice was steady, not loud, but it carried across the hall like the sound of a blade being drawn. "You speak of what you do not understand," Chancellor Carter said. "The right of challenge is not a game. It is survival. It is respect. It is how my people have lived and how we have endured." Vorthak smirked. "Endured? You mean fought like animals?" Carter's jaw tightened, but he showed no anger. He stepped forward onto the center platform. "Words are easy," Chancellor Carter said. "In Mar-9's right of challenge, we believe actions prove truth. So I offer you this choice. Face me in the duel of recognition. Let the assembly see which tradition stands stronger." The hall fell silent. Vorthak blinked, caught off guard. The duel of recognition was ancient law, almost never used. It was legal but dangerous. A public test of strength, skill, and honor. The winner's people would gain recognition. The loser's people would lose face or worse. Vorthak laughed again, but there was unease in his eyes. "You wish to play warrior, Deathworlder? So be it," Vorthak replied. "I accept your challenge. Let all here witness your defeat." High Chancellor Serene raised her hand again. "By law, the duel is accepted," she declared. "The contest will begin in 3 days. The stakes are clear. Should Captain Carter lose, Mar-9 will be stripped of its right to sit among us. Should he win, the Assembly will honor Mar-9's traditions without question." The hall buzzed with voices. Some shocked, some amused, some concerned. Carter nodded once. He turned and walked back to his delegation. His people stood with him, their faces tense but proud. Carter knew the weight he now carried. It was not just a duel. It was the future of his people. He looked up at the stars beyond the glass ceiling. "We will show them who we are," he whispered to himself. The halls of Vraction Prime were never truly silent. Ships landed. Engines hummed. Voices echoed through every corridor. But in the small quarters assigned to the Mar-9 delegation, the silence felt heavy. Captain James Carter stood at the window, looking out at the distant stars. His crew stood behind him, waiting for him to speak. The room was small. 4 humans stood there with Carter, Dr. Elena Cross, their cultural advisor, Lieutenant Marcus Hale, Carter's second-in-command, engineers Sarah Pike, and tactical officer Darnell Brooks. They had traveled across the stars together. They trusted Carter with their lives. But tonight, the air between them felt thick with unspoken fear. Elena was the first to break the silence. She stepped forward, her face tense. "James, you didn't have to call for the duel," she said softly. "We could have found another way." Carter turned to face them. His expression was calm, but his eyes were sharp. "Vorthak didn't just insult me," Carter said. "He insulted all of us. He insulted every survivor of Mara 9. If we let that stand, the Assembly will never respect us." Marcus stepped forward, his fists clenched. "We know that. But the duel of recognition, it's dangerous. You know what's at stake." Carter nodded. "I know." Sarah Pike crossed her arms. "We've read the records. No one's used the duel in over 50 years. It's not just a fight. It's a public test of skill, endurance, and control. If you lose—" Carter raised his hand to stop her. He looked at each of them, one by one. "I won't lose." Darnell frowned. "Vorthak isn't a warrior. He's a politician. He'll use every trick in the book to win." Carter walked to the center of the room. He placed his hand on the table between them. "You're right. He'll cheat if he can. He'll use technology, armor, and every advantage. But the duel isn't about weapons. It's about proving who stands stronger. It's about showing them that strength comes from who you are, not what you carry." Elena stepped closer. "They think our traditions are violence. They don't understand." Carter nodded again. His voice dropped lower, as if remembering something from long ago. "The rite of challenge on Mara 9 is not about killing. It's about survival. It's about facing death and choosing to live with honor. We face the wild. We face each other. But we do not fight to destroy. We fight to test our limits. We fight to prove we belong." He paused, remembering the harsh jungles of his homeworld, the poisonous plants, the razor-toothed beasts, the days of hunger, the nights of cold. "When I was a boy," Carter said, "I stood alone in the jungle for 3 days with nothing but a knife. I faced the shadow serpent. I should have died, but I learned something that night. Strength is not power. Strength is knowing when to strike and when to show mercy." The crew listened in silence. Carter placed his hand over his heart, where the scar from that night still rested beneath his uniform. "I will face Vorthak with nothing but the skills my world gave me," he said. "No weapons, no armor, only what I carry inside." Marcus finally nodded. "Then we stand with you, all the way." The others nodded too. Their fear was still there, but now it stood beside their loyalty. Carter turned back to the window. The stars seemed a little closer now. "We have 3 days," he said. "Prepare what you can. Learn everything you can about Vorthak's fighting history, his strengths, his weaknesses. But understand this. When I step into that arena, I go alone." Elena touched his arm gently. "You never stand alone, James." "Not really." Carter gave her a small, rare smile. "Thank you." As the crew moved to their tasks, Carter remained by the window. His reflection stared back at him. He knew what they feared. He felt it too. But fear would not guide him. Only honor. He whispered again, as if the stars themselves were listening. "For Mara 9, for all of us." Fraction Prime felt different now. News of the duel had spread like wildfire. In every hallway, on every broadcast screen, people were talking about Captain James Carter and Chancellor Vorthak. Some laughed, calling it a waste of time. Others placed bets on Vorthak's victory. No one seemed to believe Carter could win. The Mara 9 delegation felt the weight of every glance, every whisper. It was as if the whole station had turned against them. But Carter didn't flinch. He moved through the station with his head held high, as if the noise didn't reach him. His crew followed quietly, keeping their distance, but always watching his back. On the second day, Carter visited the assembly training grounds. It was a massive, open space filled with different environments: desert, jungle, ice plains. It was designed for all species to train under their own conditions. Carter chose the Gravity Gardens, a place with artificial trees, rocks, and natural light. He entered alone. The crew watched from the observation deck above. Carter didn't bring weapons or equipment. He moved through the garden in silence, stretching his muscles, walking barefoot on the soft ground. Every move was slow, controlled. He climbed trees with ease. He balanced on thin branches. He crouched low, listening to the hum of the station around him. Elena leaned against the glass, her arms crossed. "He's remembering Mara 9, she whispered. Marcus stood beside her, frowning. "He's training for something Vorthak doesn't understand." Darnell nodded. "He's going to fight the way only a Deathworlder can." The others said nothing. They just watched. Hours passed. Carter didn't stop. He ran, climbed, and moved through the artificial jungle as if it were his home. Sweat ran down his face, but his breathing stayed steady. Every step seemed to have a purpose. On the third day, the public betting screens lit up with the latest odds. Vorthak stood at the top with a 95% chance of victory. Carter sat at the bottom. The number was so low, it wasn't even worth showing. Still, Carter said nothing. Later that night, the crew gathered for a final briefing. They had done their research. Vorthak had never fought in a duel like this. He had trained with powered armor, using energy shields and pulse weapons. He had never faced a true survivalist. Carter sat at the head of the table, listening carefully. Marcus stood, holding a data pad. Vorthak will be armed. The rules allow him to choose his gear. You could take something too, James. Armor. A blade. Something. Carter shook his head. No, I will face him with nothing but my hands. The crew exchanged nervous glances. Elena leaned forward. You're sure? Carter nodded. Yes. If I fight him on his terms, we lose. If I fight on mine, we stand a chance. The crew fell silent again. Finally, Elena reached across the table and placed her hand over Carter's. Then fight with all you have, she said softly, and come back to us. Carter gave a small nod. His eyes were steady, calm. He stood and walked toward the door. But before he left, he turned to face them one last time. Tomorrow, we show them who we are. The door slid shut behind him. Carter returned to the Gravity Gardens one last time. He knelt in the center of the clearing, closing his eyes. The noise of the station faded. He breathed slowly, remembering the wind on Mara 9, the sounds of the jungle, the feel of the earth beneath his feet. He remembered the night he faced the Shadow Serpent, the cold fear, the burning pain, the moment he stood over the beast, blade in hand, choosing to let it live, choosing honor over blood. That was the lesson Vorthak had never learned. Carter opened his eyes. He stood slowly, the weight of the coming battle heavy on his shoulders. But he did not fear it. He welcomed it. The time had come. The day of the duel had arrived. Vraction Prime had never been louder. Crowds filled the walkways and observation decks. The assembly arena, a massive open sphere of energy fields and shifting terrain, stood at the heart of the station. Thousands gathered to watch. Even more watched from across the galaxy through live broadcasts. The air buzzed with excitement, but underneath it all, there was something else, doubt. Few believed Captain James Carter would survive the next hour. The Mara 9 delegations stood together in the waiting bay, silent and tense. Elena, Marcus, Sarah, and Darnell watched as Carter prepared. But there was nothing to prepare. He had brought nothing. No armor, no weapons. He wore only his survival gear, dark, close-fitting cloth that left him light and free to move. You still have time to change your mind, Marcus said quietly. Carter didn't answer right away. He tightened the straps on his boots and stood tall. Then he looked at them one last time. I've already chosen, he said. I chose the moment I stood up in that hall. Elena stepped forward, her eyes worried but steady. Then come back alive, James. Carter gave her a small nod. He turned and walked toward the lift that would take him to the arena floor. The heavy doors closed behind him. Above the arena, Chancellor Vorthak stood on the opposite side, preparing in full view of the crowd. He wore a powered combat suit, sleek, black armor with glowing red lines running along his arms and chest. His helmet retracted as he smiled for the cameras, raising his arms like a champion before the fight had even begun. The crowd cheered for him. The lift doors opened, and Carter stepped into the arena. The energy field around the platform shimmered as the environment shifted into place. The floor changed, turning into rocky ground with tall stone pillars scattered across it. Artificial wind howled through the space. Dust filled the air. Vorthak laughed when he saw Carter standing alone, unarmed. You come with nothing, Deathworlder. Vorthak called out, his voice booming through the arena speakers. Do you truly think you can stand against me with empty hands? Carter didn't respond. He stepped forward onto the rocky ground, moving with quiet focus. The High Chancellor's voice rang out above them. By the laws of the Assembly, the duel of recognition begins now. The energy field sealed shut around them. There was no turning back. Vorthak moved first, raising his left arm. A pulse blade shot out from his wrist with a loud snap. It glowed with energy, humming in the air. Vorthak charged without hesitation, moving fast with the power of his suit, driving him forward. Carter dodged the first strike by inches. The blade sliced through the air where his head had been just a moment before. He ducked low, rolling across the ground, forcing Vorthak to turn and chase him. The crowd roared. Vorthak swung again and again, each strike missing by just a breath. Carter never stopped moving. He stayed low, kept his distance, using the stone pillars as cover. He was faster without armor, lighter on his feet. Vorthak grew louder, angrier. Stop running and face me, coward. Vorthak shouted. Carter slid behind a large stone pillar, catching his breath. He could hear the power systems in Vorthak's suit humming, heating up. He knew that sound well. The suit was strong, but it had limits. It burned energy fast. Carter circled the pillar and moved to higher ground. He climbed the rocks with ease, staying out of reach. Vorthak followed, smashing through smaller pillars with brute force. But every move cost him power. The fight went on like this, Carter moving, dodging, forcing Vorthak to waste energy. The crowd started to notice. The cheers grew quieter. The mood shifted. Carter waited for his moment. Finally, Vorthak lunged too hard. His blade slammed into a stone wall, getting stuck for half a second. That was all Carter needed. He dropped down behind Vorthak, grabbing a loose stone the size of his fist. He struck the power junction on the back of the suit, just below the neck. Sparks flew. Vorthak staggered. His blade flickered and died. Carter didn't stop. He moved fast, wrapping his arm around Vorthak's neck, pulling him down to the ground. Vorthak struggled, throwing punches with his armored fists, but they were slower now. The suit had lost power. Carter forced Vorthak onto his back, pinning him with one knee on his chest. He grabbed a sharp piece of stone and pressed it lightly against Vorthak's exposed throat. The arena fell silent. Carter could end it. One move, one cut, but he didn't. He leaned close so only Vorthak could hear. This is what you never understood, Carter whispered. Strength is not in killing. It's in knowing when not to. He dropped the stone to the ground. Yield, Carter said. Vorthak gasped for breath, his pride shattered. His body tensed, but he knew he had lost. I yield. Vorthak growled through clenched teeth. The energy field around the arena dropped. The High Chancellor stood, raising her hand. The duel is over. Captain James Carter of Mara 9 is victorious. The crowd remained silent for a long moment. Then, slowly, some began to clap. It was not loud. It was not wild. But it was real. Carter stood, breathing hard but steady. He looked up at the Mara 9 delegation in the stands. They stood with pride in their eyes. Carter had won. The silence in the arena felt heavier than the battle itself. Captain James Carter stood over Chancellor Vorthak, who still lay on the ground, humiliated. The broken remains of his powered suit sparked weakly. His pulse blade was dead. The proud Selari warrior had been beaten by a man with nothing but his hands and his instincts. Carter backed away slowly, giving Vorthak space to rise. But Vorthak didn't move right away. He stayed on the ground, his pride crushed more than his body. Above them, the assembly watched, frozen in disbelief. The same leaders who had laughed at Mara 9 now sat in complete silence, as if they could not believe what they had just witnessed. Vorthak finally pulled himself to his feet, his face twisted with anger and shame. His long fingers trembled as he looked around the arena, searching for a way to save his reputation. But there was nothing left to say, nothing left to prove. He had already lost. Carter took a step forward, keeping his voice low but steady so that all could hear. You mocked us, Carter said. You called us animals. You called our ways meaningless. But you have seen the truth now. Mara, 9 survives because we understand something deeper than power. We understand respect. We understand restraint. Vorthack's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Carter looked up toward the Assembly Council, his voice growing stronger with every word. You wanted a show. You wanted to see if the Deathworlder could fight. But the rite of challenge was never just about fighting. It was about knowing when to stop, knowing when to choose life over death. I could have ended him here, Carter pointed at Vorthack, but I didn't. Because true strength is knowing when not to kill. Some in the crowd began to murmur. Others nodded slowly in agreement. Vorthack clenched his fists. His pride burned, but he knew Carter was right. He could feel the eyes of the Assembly on him, waiting for his next move. If he refused to honor the duel, his standing would fall even lower than it already had. With a deep breath, Vorthack finally raised his head and spoke, his voice bitter but clear. I acknowledge the result of the duel of recognition. Mara, 9 has proven its worth. The High Chancellor stood at her place above the arena. She raised both hands, calling the Assembly to attention. The duel has been witnessed. The victory is clear. By the laws of the Assembly, Mara 9's traditions shall be recognized without question. Mara 9 shall keep its place among us as an equal. This time, the crowd erupted, not with mockery or laughter, but with real applause. It started small, but grew louder, spreading across the arena like a wave. Some delegates stood. Others pounded their fists on the railing in support. Carter stood in the center of it all, breathing heavily but standing tall. Up in the observation deck, his team watched with pride on their faces. Elena pressed her hand to the glass, smiling softly. Marcus, Sarah, and Darnell exchanged looks of quiet relief. He did it, Elena whispered. The rest of the crew nodded in silence, too moved to speak. As the energy fields around the arena lowered, Carter turned and walked toward the exit. Vorthack remained behind, standing alone in the dust of his defeat. Carter didn't look back. When he reached the edge of the arena, Elena and Marcus were already waiting for him. Elena reached out, touching his arm. You held back, she said quietly. You could have finished him. Carter nodded. I didn't come here to win with blood. I came here to win with honor. Marcus gave him a proud smile. You showed them who we really are. Carter looked up toward the vast ceiling of the station, where the stars still shone beyond the glass. He took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the past few days lifting from his shoulders. For Mara 9, he whispered again. The crew surrounded him, standing close, their faces no longer filled with fear, but with respect and pride. Together, they turned away from the arena as the crowd continued to cheer. Mara 9 had earned its place in the galaxy. But Carter knew the journey was not over yet. The duel had ended, but the true test was still ahead. The crowd had cheered in the arena, but that did not mean every leader in the Galactic Assembly would gladly accept Mara 9. Victory in combat was one thing. Changing minds was something far more difficult. After the duel, Captain James Carter and his team were summoned to the Assembly Chamber. It was the same vast room where Vorthack had mocked Mara 9 days earlier. Now, the air was heavy with silence. Delegates from every known species sat in rows above the floor, watching closely. Carter stood alone in the center, facing the High Chancellor Serene. Her glowing eyes studied him carefully. You have won the duel, Serene said in her smooth, calm voice. By law, Mara 9 has earned recognition, but the Assembly must still cast the formal vote. Do you have anything to say before we begin? Carter looked around the great chamber. Hundreds of faces watched him, some curious, some cold, some waiting for him to fail again. He took a deep breath and spoke. You have seen what we are capable of, Carter said. You have seen how we fight, how we survive. But I ask you to see something more. He paused, making sure every voice in the room had gone silent. On Mara 9, we live in a world that tries to kill us every day. Our skies burn. Our jungles hunt. Our rivers poison. We do not fight because we enjoy it. We fight because survival demands it. But survival is not just about strength. He placed his hand over his chest. Strength without honor is nothing. Power without respect is weakness. That is the truth of the rite of challenge. It is not about killing. It is about proving you are worthy to stand among others without taking more than you need. That is why I spared Vorthak. That is why I stand here now. He turned slowly, making sure to meet the eyes of as many delegates as he could. We do not ask for your favor. We ask for your respect. Not just for Mara 9, but for every world, every culture you do not understand. We all have something to offer. We all have the right to be heard. Carter finished speaking and stood still, waiting. The chamber remained quiet. The delegates whispered among themselves. Some nodded. Others frowned. The weight of their decision hung in the air like a storm about to break. The High Chancellor raised her hand. The Assembly will vote now, she announced. Lights flickered across the chamber as each delegate cast their decision. Green for acceptance, red for rejection. One by one, the lights appeared. Carter stood without moving, his heart steady but heavy. The Mara 9 delegation watched from the balcony above, holding their breath. Elena squeezed Marcus's hand tightly. Sarah and Darnell leaned forward, counting every green light that appeared. The voting ended. The chamber lights dimmed, and the High Chancellor stood again. The vote is complete, she declared. By the majority of this assembly, Mara 9 shall retain its seat as an equal member. Its traditions and rights are now recognized by galactic law. The chamber erupted, not with laughter, not with scorn, but with real applause. It was not every delegate, but it was enough. It was a beginning. Carter let out a slow breath. He turned his head toward the balcony, locking eyes with his team. Elena smiled, tears in her eyes. Marcus raised his fist in silent victory. The rest of the team stood tall, proud. Carter looked back to the High Chancellor and gave a respectful nod. "Thank you," he said simply. Serene nodded back. "Go now, Captain. Your world has earned its place." Carter left the chamber as the applause continued. His team met him in the hallway, surrounding him with handshakes, back slaps, and quiet cheers. "You did it, James," Elena whispered. "No, Carter replied softly. "We did it." The team walked together through the long halls of Raction Prime. Other delegates passed them, some offering respectful nods, some still refusing to meet their eyes. But none dared mock them now. Mara 9 had stood in the heart of the galaxy and had not fallen. Carter knew the fight for respect would never fully end. But today they had taken the first true step, and that was enough. He looked ahead, toward the docking bay where their ship waited. The future was still unwritten. The corridors of Raction Prime had changed. Captain James Carter could feel it with every step. Gone were the mocking looks and whispered insults. Now, when the crew of Mara 9 passed, the other delegates stood aside. Some nodded in quiet respect. Some still watched with cautious eyes, unsure of what to make of the Deathworlders who had just rewritten the rules. But Carter didn't need their smiles. He didn't need their approval. He had come to earn respect, and that had been done. The crew walked with him to the docking bay. Elena, Marcus, Sarah, and Darnell walked quietly, knowing the mission was complete, but feeling the weight of all they had seen and done. None of them had believed it would come to this. They had arrived as strangers. Now they were leaving as something more. As they neared their ship, the Wayfarer, a familiar voice called out from behind them. Carter turned. Standing near the edge of the docking bay was Chancellor Vorthak, his black armor gone, replaced by simple dark robes. His face held no smile, no sneer, only a heavy, quiet expression. Carter stepped toward him. The crew stopped, ready to follow, but Carter held up his hand to stop them. This was something he had to face alone. He walked until he stood just a few steps away from Vorthak. The two men stood in silence for a long moment, the hum of the station around them. "I came to see if it was true," Vorthak said at last. His voice was low, not the proud, sharp tone he had used before. "I came to see if you would walk away like a victor or like a warrior." Carter watched him closely. "And what do you see now?" Vorthak looked down for a moment, his pride still stinging, but his voice was honest. "I see a man who fought for something greater than himself," Vorthak admitted. "I see a man who earned his place." Carter gave a small nod. "I never wanted to shame you, Vorthak. I wanted you to understand us." Vorthak's jaw tensed. He looked up, meeting Carter's eyes again. "I do now." The two men stood there, locked in that quiet moment. Then, without another word, Vorthak gave the smallest nod of respect. It wasn't much, but it was real. Then he turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd. Carter stood still for a moment, watching him go. When he turned back to his crew, Elena stepped forward. "What did he say?" she asked softly. Carter looked at her, then at the others. "He sees us now," Carter replied. The crew smiled quietly. Together, they boarded the Wayfarer. The docking clamps released, and the ship slowly lifted away from the bay. Through the wide front window, Carter watched as Vraction Prime grew smaller behind them, floating like a distant moon against the sea of stars. He stood at the window long after the others had gone to their stations. He thought of Mara 9, of its wild jungles and deadly skies. He thought of his people, who had fought so long to be seen, to be heard. They had waited for this moment for years. He had delivered it. As the ship moved into open space, Carter placed his hand on the glass. "For Mara 9, he whispered. Elena's voice came through the ship's intercom. "Course set for home." Carter smiled to himself. He turned from the window and walked toward the command deck. The future waited, and he was ready to meet it.